I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a flurry of issues and events that have dominated Jewish news over the past few weeks, not the least of which is the escalating Palestinian violence. So we're very pleased to have on our JBS phones from Jerusalem one of the State of Israel's leading journalists, Avi Issacharoff, Middle East Analyst for the Times of Israel. Avi, Shana Tova, and thank you for joining us once again on JBS.
Shana Tova and Chag Sameach.
Gam Lecha. So, Avi, let's first talk about the rising incidents of Palestinian violence directed at Jews in Jerusalem, outside the Old City, inside the Old City, and on the West Bank. From your perspective, what's really going on here?
Well, that's a tough question because we find ourselves, the analysts, the reporters, we're trying to define in the last couple of days what is really happening here, and we find real trouble in doing it because you cannot really call it an uprising, an intifada, because it's not there yet.
Yes.
But it's pretty obvious that it's not a daily routine, let's say, clashes between the IDF and Palestinians. It's bigger than that. It's not only about Jerusalem anymore. I mean, the riots, yes, they did begin in Jerusalem, but in the last 48 hours, it spread all around the West Bank. Today, there was some kind of decreasing in the clashes and in the demonstrations, and hopefully it will remain like that in the next couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Avi, do you believe all of the violence was orchestrated in some way, or was it the result of isolated incidents?
It started with isolated incidents that increased with every day that passed by since the eve of Rosh Hashanah, when there was a visit of Jewish believers headed by the Minister of Agriculture, Uri Ariel, to the Temple Mountain. And that was the spark that started those incidents. That led to many violent attacks from Palestinians, terrorist attacks and others against Jews, against Israelis. But then again, in the last 48 hours, it turned out to become demonstrations with participations of thousands in the West Bank. And I must say that my understanding and impression is that it wasn't orchestrated at all.
Mm-hmm.
That was a spontaneous outbreak of despair and maybe even disappointment from the lack of horizon, of political horizon, and lack of leadership on the Palestinian side. I mean, it wasn't only against Israelis. I think that it was a part of the despair was because the Palestinian the youngers do not believe in the Palestinian Authority anymore.
That's so interesting to hear, Avi. You know, it does not seem to be that in the Palestinian world there has been uprisings within the Palestinian community against Palestinian leadership. You're suggesting that may change, correct?
Yes, well, it's not the first time, actually. Even the second uprising, the second intifada, it wasn't only about Israel. It was also part of disappointment from Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority back then. And Yasser Arafat, back then the leader of the Palestinian people, understood that he cannot fight the mob, so he joined the mob.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Abbas finds himself in a kind of similar situation, meaning the Palestinian public opinion turns against him, and it seems like he's releasing the leashes, he's releasing the flames, he's not encouraging them, but he is more anti-Israel than we heard him in the last years.
Yes. Avi, in the United States, groups like Americans for Peace Now are suggesting that the Palestinian attacks are a direct result of, again, the diplomatic stalemates that you alluded to between Israel and the Palestinians, and are exacerbated by what Peace Now claims are irresponsible Israeli actions and Israeli statements. To what extent do Israelis, in your opinion, blame the Israeli government for the rash of Palestinian violence we've seen throughout the West Bank and in Israel of late? To what extent are Israelis blaming the Israeli government?
No, the Israelis, of course, naturally do not blame the Israeli side or the Israeli government. They blame the Palestinian side. It doesn't mean that it's right. I think that what we see today on the ground is the outcome of neglection of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the neglection of the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And then again, this is part of the despair that I see, that I witness every time that I visit the West Bank, every time that I meet with Palestinians. These are things that were heard from Palestinians. And I think that one thing that we need to understand is that the IDF, the Army Intelligence, the Israeli Shin Bet, the internal security service, even Koga, everyone warned the government that we're about to witness some kind of an outburst of Palestinian violence because of lack of negotiations and lack of progress or process in the peace process. And I don't think that anyone from the security apparatus in Israel was surprised by this so-called mini uprising. But I think that everyone expected it to come. They didn't know when will it happen exactly.
Yes. I have to tell you, Avi, every Israeli I speak with seems to be saying two things in concert. The first is that there doesn't seem to be anyone inside the Palestinian leadership today willing to embrace the idea of peaceful coexistence with a Jewish state in the Middle East, and that while Israel should always be saying it's ready to negotiate peace and be ready to do so, it is not a realistic scenario at the moment, given the current Palestinian leadership and the climate that leadership has created within the Palestinian world. Do you agree?
I do not totally agree with that. I think that, yes, the Palestinian leadership is part of the problem, but I think that the Palestinian leadership, the current Palestinian leadership, is also part of the solution. And this is a very complex situation in which we depend upon the will of the Palestinian leadership to keep things quiet and calm. And this is what happened in the last couple of years. The Palestinian leadership wasn't interested in escalation. And still, it seems that the Palestinian leadership is interested in sending messages to Israel that it needs some kind of a breakthrough, some kind of progress on the political level, on the diplomatic level, in order to calm down the situation. Even tonight, there was a meeting between Israeli and Palestinian officials trying to calm down the situation. Bottom line, we are dealing with a Palestinian leadership which are not really pro-Israel. And let's face it, they are not our friends, they are not our lovers, the Palestinians. But this is the partner that we need to deal with, because otherwise, yes, there will be a third uprising and even a large-scale escalation.
Yes. Look, at the moment, do you feel there is a Palestinian leadership willing to live, and I didn't say peace, I used the phrase peaceful coexistence, live alongside without going to war every other day? Is there a Palestinian leadership in your mind, Avi, that will accept the one thing that seems to be the nub of the problem for the Palestinian? They would have to accept Jewish sovereignty in the Middle East. Do you feel there is a Palestinian leadership ready to do that?
I think that the Palestinian leadership is willing to go for peace negotiations, is even willing to go for peace agreement with Israel and accepting Israel. But there are problems with that, because the major or the basic elements that the Palestinian leadership see as the basic elements for the peace agreement are very far from the basic principles of our government, of the Israeli government. The gaps are almost unbridgeable. I'm not saying that it's impossible mission, but I'm saying that it's almost impossible mission. Now, we need to do something about that because we cannot continue like that with no negotiations with the current status quo. And my government is leading a strategy which is saying there's no strategy and let's keep the status quo as it is. The status quo, and I'm sorry to say that, will not remain as it is right now. And we need to face the facts on the ground.
Do you think it is acceptable for there to be some kind of interim steps, Avi, not a full-blown agreement, but interim steps that would allow Israel and the Palestinians to begin to work together without worrying about the issue of, are the Palestinians accepting a Jewish state in the Middle East? Is that a possibility in your mind?
They are not willing to accept an interim agreement. For them, the 1993 Oslo Agreement was an interim agreement. And more than that, yes, they are not willing to accept or to define Israel as a Jewish state. They're saying we're ready to accept the existence of Israel, but how you define your status is your own issue. You never asked Jordan. You never asked Jordan to define you as a Jewish state. You never asked Egypt to define you as a Jewish state. So why asking us now to define Israel as a Jewish state? We're ready to accept Israel. We're ready to accept the existence of the state, but don't ask us to define Israel as the Jewish state. This is your own issue.
Okay, I will tell you what I hear from people who would take an opposing view. What they say is when Israel made peace with Jordan and with Egypt, the issue wasn't Egypt saying we want the control of the West Bank, or Jordan for that matter. They made peace and basically the borders had an integrity of their own. In this instance, you've got a Palestinian people who are saying that they want, in this second Middle East state, a right of significant Arab return, Palestinian return. And that part of the reason they don't want to say it's a Jewish state is that they would have to be acknowledging that they will publicly acknowledge to the rest of the Arab world and to their own people that the state of Israel has an integrity of its own as a Jewish state, and that if you're going to make any kind of real peace with the Palestinian people on the West Bank, they have to give up the right of significant Palestinian return, and they have to say, yes, we, Palestinian people, recognize what you have said about us. You have said that we are a people with a legitimate right to self-determination and independence. We will say to you, Jews, you are a people with an intrinsic right to self-determination and independence. It does not seem to me at all, Avi, that that's an unreasonable position for Israel to take.
Look, I had a couple of meetings with, more than a couple of meetings actually, but I had a chance to meet personally President Mahmoud Abbas and to talk to him in four eyes and not in four eyes. What I heard from him officially and non-officially is that if there will be a peace agreement, Palestinian leadership will agree to say that this is the end of demands, meaning that there will be no demand to the return of refugees to the 1948 borders or anything like that. I mean, after the agreement, after Israel will agree to A, B, C, there will be no more demands from the Palestinian side. So I know that many of the Israeli officials in Netanyahu's government, and even before Netanyahu's government, the one that invented the idea of the Jewish state was Tzipi Livni in 2008 in Annapolis summit. She demanded it. But then again, the Palestinians are saying we're willing to go for a peace agreement, willing to go to the end of demands declaration. Don't ask us to define Israel as a Jewish state. That's their bottom line. That's the most basic line. And yes, this is our problem. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying here, although what we hear from them, not willing to acknowledge Israel as a Jewish state, and I'm not sure that I, as a Jew who lives in Israel, I need them to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. It sounds to me as if it's a kind of if someone is looking here for a reason why not to negotiate. At the end of the day, I think that the negotiations will be the best tool in order to calm down the situation.
Look, you say it very well from your perspective, and I'm not here in any way to criticize that perspective as well. I only can tell you that the people who take the opposing view say it's not about whether Avi Issacharoff needs the Palestinians to define Israel as a Jewish state. It's that the Palestinian world has to be willing to, as you say, give up all claims. And if that's true, Avi, I think it would go a long way to dispelling the need for Palestinians to say it's a Jewish state. If you're right, if the Palestinians are right now prepared to say they're giving up all demands and that this peace agreement that establishes two states, we won't say what the two states are, but that ultimately there's no demand for a right of return and the Palestinians are giving up their claims on Eretz Yisrael, I think your position would have much more support throughout world Jewry. So I appreciate your saying it very much. I want to go to the second thing that Israelis seem to be united on, and that's the inadequacy of the Iran nuclear deal and a feeling that Israel is being forced to go along with a seriously flawed agreement that will permit Iran to build nuclear weapons in the next 10 to 15 years. What do you feel about the deal? And do you agree that most Israelis oppose it?
I think that on this point, there's much more consensus on the Israeli side and the Israeli public among the righties and the lefties that it's a bad deal. Yes, it's not the worst thing on earth, and the worst thing on earth would have been if Iran would get a nuclear weapon now, in a couple of months, or in a year or two, but we just delay the end. That's the whole thing what we're doing right now. And I have to tell you, as a Middle East analyst, Mark, my worries right now are not even about the nuclear weapons. I think that my worries right now, and this is something that the U.S. administration completely neglected by decision, the implications of this agreement would be passing to Iran hundreds of billions of dollars, and I'm not exaggerating here, more than hundreds of billions of dollars that will be passed to Iran banks, and from there to all kinds of terrorist groups that would allow them to flourish, to prosper, to get more weaponry, to get more arms in order to go and fight not only Israel. And this is something that the American public needs to understand. It is not only about Israel. This is about fighting against Sunni moderate states. This is against the U.S. itself. And I would like to remind the audience that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are operating not in Iran. They're working all over the Middle East and even in Latin America, in South America, in Europe, all over. And those billions of dollars, yes, they would allow them to become stronger, better on the terrorist level, and to damage American, Israeli, Arab interests all over the world. And that's the big catastrophe, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. By the way, Avi, what do you say to yourself? How do Israelis explain to themselves how the President of the United States and the American administration could overlook what you're saying, could be so wrong? How do you explain this kind of what you believe is a terrible mistake in foreign policy by the United States?
I think that the American administration, headed by President Barack Obama, was completely focusing about the nuclear issue. So in a way, if you look at the nuclear issue, they delayed the problem. They solved the problem for 10 years. If, of course, Iran will follow the rules of the game, of the new game. But I think that they focus so much about the nuclear issue, and they focus so much about ISIS, that they didn't see that the real enemy right now is not only ISIS. It's ISIS, yes, but it's also the Shiite crescent. It's also about Iran, Hezbollah, the Syrian regime that is slaughtering their people, still, after 4.5 years of civil war, they are still killing their own people. And at the end of the day, the American administration did not want to intervene in the Middle East and decided to leave it to other side problems. Russians, Israelis, Gulf countries, Sunni countries, it's not our problem. We're not looking for another army intervention in the Middle East.
So in part, it has to do with an overall view of world global politics that you feel is misguided within the American administration.
Look, it's very easy for me as an Israeli to sit here and to criticize the American administration. I understand. I can really understand that the American administration position, which is that we don't want to intervene anymore in the Middle East. We had our scars in Afghanistan. We had our terrible scars in Iraq. So we don't want to mess with the Middle East. Let other sides, let other entities to deal with it. The problem is, for the Israelis, of course, is that neglecting the Middle East from the American perspective leaves us at the outfront of siding against the terrorists, whether it's Iranians or Hezbollah or others. And that is the very complex situation in which we're dealing with right now.
Yes.
The American administration said it would. Yes, we don't want to deal with this mess anymore, but it leaves us and the Sunni moderate countries to deal with this mess.
Okay, one other issue, Avi, again, on the world scene, and you've touched on it already, this resurgence of Russia under Vladimir Putin, who seems to be occupying a vacuum created by the United States' unwillingness to be involved in the Middle East. So Putin has sent Russian troops into Syria. As we are taping now, it's reported that Russia has ground troops in Syria and seems to be wresting control of the Middle East away from the United States. At the same time, Avi, the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, has visited the Kremlin, has met with Mr. Putin, and seems to be seeking cooperation between Israel and Russia. And he appeared on CNN's Fareed Zakaria show this past weekend, and Mr. Netanyahu made it clear that Israel will never have the relationship with Russia that it has with the United States. But people are asking, why does Israel want to cozy up to Russia at this moment in history when Russia is an ally of both Iran and of Syrian President Assad? So I want your sense as an Israeli again, and this is your field here. What's your sense of the Israeli-Russian connection?
Well, maybe there is some kind of a belief or a hope from the Israeli side that by talking to the Russians, it will change the atmosphere. It will allow some kind of cooperation between the Russians and the state of Israel. Especially, when we talk about daily issues like flying aircraft, Israeli aircraft above Syria and above Lebanon, while there are Russian aircraft also crossing the airfield above Syria and Lebanon. Bottom line, I think that Netanyahu, just like the president of Egypt, Sisi, they all understood the new equation of the Middle East, meaning there is only one major power here, and this is not the U.S., it's Russia. And you need to deal with, because otherwise, if one deal with the Russians, you will find yourself fighting against the Russians. And I don't think that Israel is interested right now in fighting against the Russians.
I want to make sure we hear you correctly. Are you saying that the way Israel views global politics today, the only major power in the Middle East is Russia?
Well, look, I didn't have a chance to talk to Netanyahu his position, but I think that he understood that this is the reality. And then again, it's not typical only for the state of Israel. It's also, you can find it all over the Gulf countries, all over the Middle East, with Egypt understanding the new equation, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, everyone understanding that they need to deal with Russia. The U.S. in a way is out of this equation. The U.S. is not going to send troops on the ground, or they're not going to have boots on the ground, while the Russians are intending or planning to do it. So you need to deal with the Russians. That's the reality. And if you ask me why are the Russians doing that, why are they sending troops on the ground, the only answer that I can give you is they can. They can, meaning a couple of years ago they couldn't do it. Now they understand that they can because the U.S. is not going to stop them. And in a way, the U.S. is interested in the Russian intervention in Syria in order to stop the violence and stop ISIS over there.
Mm-hmm. Avi, it is always wonderful to talk to you and share your insight. And again, I thank you for waiting up late at night in Israel for taking this call. But you provide us with a wonderful service. I wish you again Shana Tova Umituka, and I hope we speak with each other very often in this new year.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You be well. Avi Issacharoff, Middle East Analyst for the Times of Israel. My thanks, as always, to Serge Goldberg, who is both Director and Production Coordinator for this edition of In the News, to our JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.